Hello all Cape Bird Club members. When Priscilla asked us to share our photographs, she advised that these photographs did not have to be our best photographs. And so we are holding her to her word this evening, and we are not sharing our best photographs. Daryl and I won't be sharing any unusual birds, and you won't be learning anything new about birds. The birds that we are going to show, or the photographs that we're going to share, are photographs that conjure up memories and conjure up moments for us. It could be memories of people, it could be memories of places, or situations. Birding for Daryl and for me, it is about counting, it is about lifers, but it's so much more than that. It's about the enjoyment and the pleasure that nature and the environment gives us. We count bird lifers, and we also count dragonfly, butterfly and damselfly lifers. So we are out almost every day enjoying the environment. We enjoy photography, which Daryl will tell you more about, and we also enjoy the company and the camaraderie of our new birding friends. But we are not hardened twitchers. We don't jump on an aeroplane or travel for kilometers on our motor car to go and twitch a rarity. However, we have participated in some twitches close to home. And this is one of them, the yellow-crowned bishop that was in Noordhoek. And this yellow-crowned bishop was on a private estate. And thank you to the property owners who are also interested in nature and in birds. They were able to meet birders at the gate to their estate, the entrance to their estate, and take us to the wetland that this bird was visiting. And our thanks goes to one of our CBC members, Barry Cohen, who kindly fetched us at the gate and took us to this wetland. Barry doesn't live on their estate, but his mom does, and so he had access to their estate. And we were able to twitch successfully this startling bird, bright yellow and black, very startling colors. Other close to home twitches that we have participated in include the crested honey buzzard, which was in Helderberg, and the noddy in the Strand, and then at Strandfontein Sewerage Works, the Baird sandpiper and the Franklin's gull. What we really enjoyed about these twitches was the great spirit amongst the birders. The birders tend to be very patient and enthusiastic and are really keen that every single one of those at the twitch see the bird. Sometimes it's a case of younger eyes assisting older eyes. So I don't think that we'll be dashing off to go and twitch birds or drive many miles to find birds, but you never know. We've really enjoyed the camaraderie and the friendship that we have found in birding. So this picture is to all the birders out there who are so friendly and patient with us. Earlier this year, Dennis and Gigi Laidler invited us to go camping and birding with them in De Hoop Nature Reserve. This was a first for us, the camping and De Hoop Nature Reserve, which we really enjoyed and would recommend to anybody. We all decided that we'd take a slow drive to the reserve and we would stop to admire the view, take photographs and enjoy the birding along the way. We had communication with each other, we had walkie-talkies, so we were able to communicate with each other. But along some of the gravel roads, the farm roads, Daryl and I dithered rather a lot taking photographs, and we lost contact with Dennis and Gigi. As we drove along one of the farm roads, we spotted two adult blue cranes in a field. And we stopped to try and take a photograph, but as happens with blue cranes, they can be a little bit nervous, and they turned and started walking away from us, from the fence. They had been standing at a water trough, but of course walked off as soon as we tried to take photographs of them. As we drove off, we noticed out of the corner of our eyes a lot of water splashing out of the water trough. And we stopped, got out of the car, walked up to the fence, up a bank, up to the fence, and saw that there was a young blue crane splashing around in the water trough, trying desperately to get out of this trough. Now, what to do when a drowning bird needs to get out of the water trough and there's a high barbed wire fence between you and the bird. Well, you send in your partner. You lift the wire, the strands of barbed wire, and send him through, and hoping that he will avoid shredding his back and shredding his shirt. By now, of course, the parents were very far away, especially with us going into the field to try and rescue this bird. Well, Daryl eventually managed to grab or hold on to this bird. It was drenched, it was panicking, and it took a while and it was rather difficult, but he managed to hold the bird and put it down on the ground. It couldn't stand up, it was absolutely exhausted and kept falling over. But eventually it found its feet. And then, to our amazement, it started zigzagging drunkenly and stumbling up the field, moving directly towards its parents. We did not hear them calling. I don't think the bird even cheeped, and yet it was able to make its way directly to its parents. And this for us was a real feel-good moment. And finally, a large-billed lark. Friends of ours lived for many years on the High Noon farm in Villersdorp, and their daughter Susan and her husband Gavin Smith lived on the farm as well. Gavin Smith was a gunsmith. His workshop was a very fascinating and interesting place to visit. He made suppressors and silencers for rifles, and he was well known around Cape Town for his excellent workmanship. It requires great precision work, and he was well known for this. So much so that the author, Dion Meyer, when he was writing the book 7 Days, he got hold of Gavin and asked him to guide him with the technical details of about guns. In the story, in the book, the sniper, he starts shooting and killing policemen in the police force. And Dion Meyer wanted to be sure that his facts about guns were absolutely correct, and he consulted with Gavin. So the gunsmith in Villersdorp is mentioned in the book. Gavin and Susan eventually moved to Teslarsdal, and sadly Gavin passed away last year. And when we went to visit Susan, we saw lots and lots of larks and pipits, and in particular this particular large-billed lark, the squeaky wheel lark, was very, very vocal as we drove up to the house. So this particular picture is in memory of Gavin Smith.
Evening, fellow members of the Cape Town Bird Club. As Lynette has already told you, we're not going to show you our absolutely very best photographs. We are showing photos that mean something to us. They have a story behind it, and hopefully eventually they will mean something to you. Lynette retired at the end of 2014, and in February of 2015 we went up to George to help with the organizing of the Dimension Data golf tournament, and thereafter we carried on further up the coast and we went to the Addo National Park. When we eventually entered the park, where we could watch the animals or see the animals, the first thing we saw was this beautiful grey bird with orange legs and orange beak sitting on the bush. We were fascinated because we'd never seen a bird like this before, and also it never moved as we got closer to it. He sat there and he looked at us as if to say, "Why are you not taking my photograph? Please go ahead and do so." Anyway, I hauled out my trusty cell phone and took a photograph of him, and this is the result. This was truly the genesis of our birding passion, and we've quickly found out that to become effective identifiers of birds, we needed to take photographs of them. So we started out with a little Canon bridge camera. But we soon found out that that was not really the entire answer to our problems, because we had situations where a bird would be on the net side or a bird would be on my side. And we only had one camera. So we played the game past the camera on a regular basis. So we thought there's only one way to solve this problem. So we got ourselves another camera. So our first two cameras were a Canon bridge and a Nikon bridge camera. But after that, I decided that I wanted to get a DSLR, so I have my DSLR Canon 7D Mark II. From the humble beginnings, our birding passion started, as did our photographic passion as well. In May 2021, we were very fortunate to join Dennis and Gigi Leidler for a trip, a camping trip nogal, to the Richtersveld, which, as most people know, is right on the northern border with Namibia. In fact, the Orange River is the border between South Africa and Namibia. The Richtersveld is South Africa's only true desert, and it is a landscape that is very, very desolate. It is dry, almost waterless, but the vistas are magnificent. The mountains in the distance are varying shades of brown intermixed with purples. And when the sun is rising or setting, it is truly a fantastic sight to behold. If you've never been to the Richtersveld, I suggest you try your best to get there, but you have to go and camp. I photographed this grey-coloured mountain wheat ear at a rock formation called the Hand of God, and I'm sure many of you have seen photographs of this particular formation. Also, pretty close to this grey-coloured bird was the black mountain wheat ear as well. And in the beginning, we said we were not going to show you our top photographs, but we lied a little, because this is the photograph that I took one grey, misty morning at the Geelbek Hard in the West Cape National Park. Believe it or not, it was absolutely windless, which allowed for fantastic reflections of the birds that were in the water. This is a greater flamingo, and this photograph was a finalist in the Getaway Gallery photography competition for 2021. Unfortunately, this photograph did not bring home the bacon, and I didn't win any prizes, but I felt chuffed that one of my photographs was actually chosen as a finalist. For those who are interested, I used my EOS 7D Mark II camera with a 100 to 400 zoom lens. Thank you.
Right, we were invited on this trip by friends of ours. The primary purpose of the trip was to tackle some of the mountain passes in the area. All of us had 4x4 vehicles. Highlight of our stay, we spent about 10 days in the area. Highlight of our trip was a stay at Tennehead Mountain Lodge, which is one of the highest lodges in South Africa at 2,500 meters. And we spent a few nights there, enjoying such luxury in the midst of a very wild part of the country. The snow during winter is up to 2 meters deep. The Ben 10 challenge was set up by a chap called Trigley Roberts, who runs a website called Mountain Passes, and we were going to tackle as many of those as we could during the period. Obviously, all of us were keen birders, and we had a target list. Sorry, prime among it would have been a bearded vulture, which we only saw really in the distance, soaring with a squadron of Cape vultures. But another one of our real specials was the Drakensberg rock jump. We were lucky enough to have several pairs of these around the lodge. They're obviously related to the Cape Rock jumper, but their distributions do not overlap. The Drakensberg rock jumper is almost restricted to the highlands around Lesotho, but there are also patches or sightings in Mountain Zebra National Park and around Graafrenet. And Margie?
Amongst others of our target species was this Drakensberg siskin, very closely related to the Cape siskin. But as you can see, it doesn't have the white tail band or the crisp crescents at the markers at the end of its wingtips. They're fairly common in the area, especially about 2,000 meters, and they forage in amongst the shrubs and on the ground, not always easy to see, but plentiful around the lodge. When they fly away in undulating, the flocks fly away in undulating fashion, and their call is peachy, peachy. So hence their Afrikaans name, Bergpeachy, canary. Beautiful little birds, really lovely. We had excellent sightings of this Cape bunting up at the lodge. And although very familiar to most of us, especially, you know, from Cape Point, we've seen them and they're up the west coast. This one happens to be one of the 6 subspecies found in Southern Africa, and it's subspecies Basutoensis. Handsome indeed, and very easy to identify. Not a bird, but a mammal this time, and also an endemic to the region, the Sloggett's ice rat, probably more properly known as a flay rat, but I just love the name ice rat. We first saw them up at Sani Pass, at the top of the pass at Sani Lodge. Didn't really know what they were, and subsequently found out Sloggett's ice rat, called after Colonel Sloggett, who was a British officer and doctor who came out to South Africa in the early 1900s for the Boer War. These little rats live in burrows, but they come out to feed in the daytime and also sun themselves on the rocks. And the rocky walls surrounding the lodges were just a perfect habitat for them. To differentiate them from other flay rats, you'll see it's got a little brown nose, and it's protected against the cold. It's got thick furry, thick fur, small ears, and a very short tail. And when it's cold, they all huddle in burrows and keep warm because it can get quite cold up there.
From the highlands of the Southern Drakensberg, we headed home via roads and a couple of the passes, and spent 3 nights in the War Trail Valley. Running up the War Trail Valley is a pass called Lundine's Neck, which is the main pass accessing Lesotho from the Southern Drakensberg, from the Eastern Cape. Staying at the farmhouse, in fact, driving there, we saw the number of raptor species that we saw plenty of jackal buzzards. Staying at the farmhouse, we had a black eagle circling very low, being harassed by a jackal buzzard. And then we climbed up to a krantz overlooking the farmhouse, and there was an African harrier hawk busy searching in all the rock crevices. So we had wonderful sightings there. But our most exciting sightings in that area were grey-crowned cranes. There were numerous flocks of them, but I think a highlight was this sighting of a mom and daughter, sub-adult. Thank you. That's us.
I'm going to speak to you about 2 special larks, which were shown to us by bird guide Norman Newby. In 2020, February, I started on a safari with 2 cousins from Australia. We had intended to go to parts of Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, but we got as far as the Namibian border where we were stopped because of COVID. A year later, I was so frustrated that I simply had to undertake a safari, even though it meant staying within South Africa. So we started on the west in Namakwa, which was terribly dry, and we worked progressively northeastwards. The country was getting wetter and wetter all the time, until after going through the Kruger Park, we eventually reached Wackerstroom in the east. In Wackerstroom, we engaged bird guide Norman Movie. He is shown in these photos. On the right, he is equipped for birding with his Swarovski binoculars, but unfortunately his face is shaded out by that cap. So I got another photo so that you could see his face clearly. The list we gave Norman included Boetes and Rudd's larks. He commented that March the 18th was late in the season, but he would do his best. In what followed, he educated us in the way these two larks utilize or use distinctly different habitats. First, he took us to Dachakral, which is a sort of rural township where the grass is kept short by grazing, short and sparse. This is the preferred habitat of Boetes lark, and indeed we found them there. But before I could get good photos, they were flushed by a passing donkey cart. But Trevor Hardaker and Warwick Tarbottom have confirmed that my photos do indeed show Boetes lark. The next slide shows is a photo of birders at Dachakral photographing Boetes lark, guided by Norman. Next, we went to find Rudd's lark at a place called Fickland Pan, where the grass cover is much more dense and the grass is longer, as you will see in the photographs. I was able to get better photos. These show a parent carrying a food item, which means that even at this late stage in the summer, they were still feeding either nestlings or fledglings. Incidentally, both parents feed the chicks. The Rudd's lark has distinctive features that show well in the photos. In the middle of the crown, on top of the head, the feathers are parted in a distinct line, like the parting in a human hair. The next feature is the eyebrows, which have been described as erectile, prominent erectile eyebrows. And indeed they are, they remind one of the eyebrows of an old man, bushy eyebrows, very prominent. And lastly, the feathers on the back are distinctly scalloped. So here you can see you can see that parting in the crown, just like the parting in a human hair. And also these eyebrows, erectile eyebrows, they really are very prominent. Here you can see them again. And the feathers on the back here are distinctly scalloped. So this medium-sized lark has features which enable one to identify it without dispute. Larks, of course, can be confusing. To end off, Norman Newby is highly recommended. He found numerous other birds for us, and his spoken English is fluent. His contact details by email are his surname followed by NS @gmail.com, and his cell phone is 066 154 9283. Apparently, the internet connection in Wakkerstroom is weak, so it is better to use a phone. He does also use WhatsApp. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Nigel Cornfield. I'm actually a photographer at heart who loves birds rather than an expert birder. I was introduced to birding by Heather Howell when I took my 8-year-old son to her junior bird club excursions. It started as a parental duty and rather quickly developed into a passion. The images that follow were selected for interest value rather than photographic merit. Our home borders on the Dordrecht Walk, which has a deep rivier running through it. Our garden is very secluded and there's large trees and dense shrubs along the boundary, making it a complete haven for all types of birds. We also do not have cats. We were lucky enough to have a resident pair of black sparrowhawks. They seem to regard our lawn and trees as a picnic area, often leaving the feathered remains of their prey for us to clean up after them. The image on the screen is the dark morph parent of the chicks who will feature later. While walking our dog, my wife discovered a nest in a large tree very close to our property. When we went back to investigate, we were thrilled to see 2 little white heads peering over the edge. I was lucky enough to be able to get high enough to take the next photograph of the chicks. The mother was perched on top of a nearby tree, keeping a beady eye on our movements. She was the light morph parent. I think. We contacted the Fitzpatrick Black Sparrow Hawk Project, who sent out 2 ornithologists to ring the chicks. The nest was high up in the tree, and they would have had to climb up using ropes. They felt that the chicks were probably too mature and mobile and might panic, leaving the nest and possibly falling. They decided not to risk it, so the chicks are now unringed. The next image is one of the chicks 12 days later. Just before they fledged, there were still remnants of the white downy chick feathers visible. I was amazed at the transformation from fluffy chicks to proper hawks in such a short period. One of the pair was sitting outside the nest, and that's when I got my best view. The Fitzpatrick group has proposed that successful rearing of chicks is heavily dependent on the morph of the male parent, and also on how early in the breeding season they were reared. Apparently in Cape Town, where the breeding season is from May to September, chicks reared at the start of the breeding season have more chance of survival if the male parent was the dark morph. This is because dark morph males are able to hunt more successfully in rainier and cloudier weather, which are the conditions experienced early in the breeding season. In contrast, light morphs may be more successful later on when weather conditions become brighter and drier. Our chicks were born to a light morph mother and a dark morph father in mid-September, at the end of the season. Apparently not a good combination. Fortunately, both chicks were successfully reared. One of the joys of living in Cape Town is just how close we are to wild nature, even in the suburbs. However, I must add, a year later, City Council came and cut down the trees, including the one with the nest in it. This was to prevent vagrants setting up shacks on the greenbelt. My next image is from a totally different environment. It is a slide I took of a flightless rail on Aldebra Atoll, one of the British Indian Ocean islands, in 1973, when I visited the island on my yacht Marimba. These birds are known as the bird that would not die. They only occur in Aldebra. The photos that follow were taken with a Nikon F on 64 ASA Ektachrome, totally manual focus and exposure with no burst mode. Film was expensive and not available within 500 kilometers. Every shot had to count. The Aldabra flightless rail evolved from the white-throated rail of Madagascar. When populations there became too large, massive flocks of these birds migrate, both east and west, colonizing many of the islands scattered in the Western Indian Ocean, including Aldabra. This happens every 100 or so years. Aldabra has no natural predators for the birds, and as their ability to fly was unnecessary, they lost the power of flight. The bird became extinct when Aldabra was inundated by a major flood about 136,000 years ago. This wiped out all terrestrial animals. Fossils of this bird have been found on the island. When Aldabra re-emerged tens of thousands of years later, it was once again colonized by the white-throated rail, and since there were still no predators, they once again evolved along the same path, and within 20,000 years became flightless again. Comparison of the fossil leg bones predating the floods are almost identical to those of the present birds. This duplication of the evolutionary path is very rare. Aldabra was declared a World Heritage Site in 1982 and is now leased by the Royal Society, which has a research station on Picard Island, the only inhabited island of the 4 comprising the atoll. Visitors are not welcome. They are not allowed onto the island except by special invite from the Royal Society. Aldabra is purely a coral island atoll sitting on top of a 1.5 million-year-old volcano. It has no fresh water source, and it has virtually no water for 6 months of the year. Attempts have been made to establish coconut palms and grow other crops on Picard Island, but all have failed due to lack of soil and water. However, unfortunately, the workers introduced domestic cats to the island. The flightless rail became easy pay, and they seemed destined to follow the dodo into extinction. When I was there in 1973, there were very few birds left, probably less than 40. In 1999, cats were totally eradicated from the 4 islands, and a rail reintroduction program was initiated. In less than 20 years, an initial population of 8 reintroduced birds had ballooned to over 3,000. There were initially 20, but 2 died. Aldabra is home to about 400 species of flora and fauna, which are specific to the island. It has what is probably the largest frigate breeding colony in the world. Both greater and lesser frigates are found here in their thousands. The chicks are very vociferous. You can get very close to the birds without disturbing them. It is also home to the Aldabra kestrel, which is one of the smallest and rarest raptors in the world. The beaches are the largest green turtle egg-laying sites in the world. It is a home to the only giant tortoises left in their natural habitat. These weigh up to 200 kilograms. It is a truly unique and fascinating island, and Roy Beamish's book, Aldabra Alone, is well worth reading. Thank you very much for listening.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jessie Blackshaw. I'm going to tell you about the Harold Porter Garden in Betty's Bay, which is one of my favorite places because there's so much to see. Beautiful trees, flowers, insects, birds, butterflies, snake even, or a baboon perhaps. But just before the bridge to Dowser Cliff, there's a large patch of Leonotus leonuris flowers. It's also known as the wild dagga, and that's where I often stop and see the beautiful malachite sunbirds. The other sunbirds also use these flowers, but this particular one is I think the most beautiful of all of them. And it's lovely spending time there, just looking. After crossing the bridge towards Dyser Kloof, there's a long bricked pathway leading towards the dam. I was walking there one day with my sister and brother-in-law, when all of a sudden there was a movement that caught my eye. A small bird had just flown down into the pathway. A bird I'd never ever seen at Betty's Bay before. It looked very much like the bunting we had just seen. So I looked it up on my bird app on my phone and found that it was a female cinnamon-breasted bunting. And I don't know if anyone had ever seen one at Betty's Bay before. This one was very tame, and she allowed us to walk within 1 meter of her while she was busily eating the seeds of the grass growing alongside the bricks. It was the most beautiful time, about 20 minutes that we spent just watching her going up and down, almost as though she didn't know we were there. Whenever I walk into Dyser Kloof, I look out for the blue-mantled crested flycatcher. This area is the western limit of its range. We have been keeping a Betty's Bay bird list since our house was built in 1982, and we first saw this bird in 1988. But since then, I think we've only seen it about 12 times, and each time I could never get a good photograph of it until this time when I saw it in September last year. I love the way Roberts describes the way this bird eats. While foraging, it pirouettes with fan tail and drooped wings, swinging its body from side to side, and I think that's the reason why I could never get a good photo. No one else was there that day, and I just watched it flitting around in the trees, picking up little muggies. And then after a while I went home because I had to go home, but the bird remained there. And the next day she was there again. In fact, actually it's a he, I believe, because the top of the head is rather black. So that was a very special time to see this beautiful bird. I just want to tell you 2 funny stories about the baboons. I also see at Betty's Bay, at the same place near Dyser Kloof. One day I was walking there by myself. It was about midday, and on one of the benches were 2 adult baboons just sitting there watching and looking at the view. But in the trees their children were playing, the teenagers and the little ones, and they were very sweet because they were helping each other. The big ones were helping the little ones when they fell off a branch because they were still practicing climbing. So that was a lovely experience. And then the second time, in the same area, near the toilets, I just stood there and I laughed out loud because in the trees there was toilet paper draped all over the place. I think these baboons have thought, "Ooh, the toilet's unlocked, let's go in and see what we can find." And they brought out all the toilet rolls and strung them up in the trees. So I think it would be a good idea if all of you who haven't been to Harold Porter would go there for a visit. You can even take a picnic lunch and get a key to go into Leopard's Kloof and see if you can find the red Dysers.
Right, morning all folks. On a lovely balmy Sunday morning in May, we decided to take ourselves up the coast and passing through Blouberg and then Melkbos. It was absolutely packed with visitors, so we just carried on driving and eventually ended up at Eiserfontein. Here we took ourselves down the coast to the newer part of the town where there's some massive building going on. But we're quite fortunate to see this black-winged kite sitting on a pole looking out for lunch. Eventually it flew off. And we thought, well, that's the last we've seen of it. But a couple of minutes later, whilst we were driving on, what we assumed was the same bird turned up on a pole right next to where we were parked and decided and sort of decided to have its lunch, which it had meanwhile caught, a nice juicy mouse. It was the perfect opportunity for some photography. Unfortunately, I can only share one image with you, but this was as it was getting stuck in with a vengeance and obviously enjoying its meal. I think I took about 20 odd pictures, and this is one of the last ones as it's finally getting to grips with the rest of the mouse. And eventually every last bit of it went down the hatch, and it looked like a very happy kite having had a great meal on a lovely afternoon. Sadly, it wasn't on natural sort of vegetation, but the telegraph pole did just as well. And it was really nice to be able to watch this quite shy bird at times getting stuck into its Sunday lunch. On another occasion, we were up the west coast in the park and down at the coast. Here you always get oyster catchers on the rocks, and at low tide they're generally seen chipping away at the black mussels that they most usually feed on. But this one was having a fairly tough time on the beach, attempting to pull out what looked like a very, very large worm that was definitely fighting back and giving the oyster catcher quite a hard time. Eventually it managed, and you can see it's sort of straining away, trying to pull out what was obviously a very juicy tidbit, which it eventually managed to secure. The third image was taken just a week ago today as I'm recording this. So it was a Saturday at the end of June. We took ourselves down to the urban park where the Cape Town soccer stadium is for a nice walk around on quite a cool, blustery morning. In the park were various signboards saying what you should do if you came across an otter, which to us sounded a very odd thing, as it seemed the most unlikely place to see otters. And we'd certainly not seen one there before. But we had noticed on a previous visit that there were lots of very large fish, I think tilapia, in the various ponds. So it was obviously a good spot, and whether these otters were introduced or arrived naturally somehow, I don't know. But a couple of people then said to us, "Have you seen the otters?" And we said, "Really, where are they?" And sure enough, there was a pair of them having a great time quite close to the main path that runs past the big pan and sort of ancillary pan under a bridge. As we watched them, they were in and out of the reed beds and amazingly catching fish on a very regular basis. So it was really quite fun having to try and get some decent photographs of them. And eventually I managed to take a few, and this one is obviously having a pretty successful time of it. And you can see quite clearly why it's called Cape Clawless Otter, as its little feet are busy shoveling this quite large tilapia into its mouth. And you can see the sort of stumpy fingers with no claws. So that was quite exciting to see, as it's an animal that one really doesn't see all that often in this part of the world. And here they are in the urban park right in the middle of Cape Town. Hopefully they will continue to successfully stay there and be a great source of delight to the many people that were sort of watching them hunt, and quite successfully at that. Okay, I think that's my lot, so I'll hand back to Priscilla and on to the next person. Thank you.
Good evening. When the invitation went out for Cape Bird Club members to participate in a photographic evening, Andrew and I did not initially sign up. After all, we knew there was no shortage of highly talented photographers who have superb and stunning images in their portfolios. When a second call was made saying further photographers were needed, we contacted our chairman, Priscilla, and volunteered. After having committed, we then faced the challenge of which images to share that would tell a tale. Some of you attended the conservation conversation last month, where BirdLife South Africa presented Owl Awards. acknowledging the contributions of individuals and organizations that are helping with their important conservation work. Owl Awards provided us with inspiration for a theme, but rather than honoring people, we thought we'd recognize some of the birds that we've enjoyed observing and photographing and that have made for memorable experiences. We are always delighted when we include an owl among the day's sightings, and their calls often form the background soundtrack for our camping and other adventures. They bring us joy and reels of happy memories, and we therefore decided that we would each share with you a few owl photos and the story behind the pixels. We will tell you the who behind the shot, or is that the who? Who took the picture and who the photo features. Andrew may also tell you who the photo was taken, what camera lens, exposure, and shutter speed. Our journey tonight starts at our home. This is our spotted eagle owl that is resident in our neighborhood and sometimes visits us, sitting on the street light of our pavement or on the roof of the house. But for our first nomination for an Owl Award, we need to journey up to the Kalahari National Park. Our destination is Eurycarus Wilderness Camp. First, we travel along the riverbed from Tuirafiran towards Mata, where it pays to stop and scan the trees along the way. You could be rewarded with a sighting of a Verreaux's eagle owl, or is that giant eagle owl. This trip to Kalahari took place in May 2019. We traveled together with friends Marty and Jerry, who had not visited the park before. Jerry was also fairly new to birding at that time, and so it was great to bird along, sharing the excitement of someone seeing a bird species for the first time. It was as if we too had a new pair of binoculars. This barn owl was sharing the carport under the cabin that Albert and Mariki Froneman were residing in the camp. Birders may find it hard to believe that barn owl was one of the last Southern African owls I got to see really well. I was always so keen to see a barn owl that I would be amongst the first to venture into a derelict building, only to have the owl fly over my head and give great views to those patiently waiting outside. And CBC outing to the West Coast Fossil Park some years ago being one such example. I even had fantastic scope views of a pair of Pals fishing owls in Musi Pans with Mel and Vern before I really had great views of a barn owl. I recall Andrew and I twitching a barn owl during the BirdLife AGM in Palabora, rushing off to the Kruger National Park after having received Jen on one owl residing in the laundry in the Mapani camp. In fact, let's journey east to Kruger National Park. This cute little African scops owl was taken on a trip to Kruger in February 2020. Let's not disturb his nap any further and move on to our next nomination for an Owl Award. This photo of an African barred owl was taken at Senze Rustic Campsite shortly after meeting the staff who work in this camp, Elena and Roger. This sighting counts as one of the highlights of the trip, and we look forward to a return visit to the area.
For the next few hours, we will be going international. We will be taking to the wing and traveling across to South America. It will, of course, be an overnight flight. Our virtual trip takes us to Ecuador during the Cape Bird Club International Tour in 2012. We had just flown down from Quito in the Andes and arrived at Coco in the Ecuadorian Amazon. From Coco, it was an hour-long high-speed boat trip down the Rio Napo, and a walk through the jungle and a canoe trip across the lake to the lodge. It was during this walk, glasses fogged up and dripping wet from the extreme humidity that we were as yet unaccustomed to, that we saw this tawny-bellied screech owl. All tucked up against the trunk and looking rather damp, clearly he was having the same humidity experience that we were. A few days later, whilst out on a walk near the lodge, we saw the resident pair of crested owl. These owls must surely be the most distinguished looking of all owls. This moment, as well as the moments that followed, were for me some of the most memorable of the trip, because it was less than 5 minutes later that we saw our first poisoned dart frog in the leaf litter. Sticking with the Cape Bird Club International trips, another night flight takes us over to Sri Lanka and into the forests of Kitugala. This owl is the Serendip scops owl, a recently described species having been seen for the first time by a local ornithologist in 2001 after 6 years of tracking its call. It was formally described in 2004 with a population was known to be only 80 individuals. We were privileged to be able to see it 11 years later. This picture also serves as a reminder of the difficulties of photographing in the tropics. We found this small owl at lunchtime deep in the forest undergrowth. Overhead, the sky had its usual thick layer of cloud. Naturally, we did not approach the owl too closely to minimize disturbance and had to make use of our long lenses for pictures. The photographers amongst you may recognize the impossibility of the settings. Even with an ISO of 5000 and an aperture of 6.3, the maximum for my lens, the shutter speed was only a 40th of a second. For a 500mm lens, effectively 750mm with a crop factor, this ought to have been an impossible handheld shot. Under the circumstances, I am more than pleased with the results. My secret was a more than sufficient sampling of the locally grown Robusta bean coffee to counter the shakes. Keeping on the topic, though not entirely, the next two pictures bring us back home for the Owlet Awards. Because Heather and I don't always keep our eyes on the sky, but also sometimes on the ground, we have included some macro owlets. This is an owl fly that visited us one night when we were in KwaZulu-Natal. Owl flies are members of the same order as lacewings. Our last macro owl brings us closer to home and is an owl moth. This cream-striped owl visited us on a Cape Bird Club camp to Grootvadersbos shortly before we heard the wood owls hooting in the distance. Thank you for your attention. If you have any comments or queries, please post them in the chat. We hope that you enjoyed looking at our photos and that perhaps it prompted you to think of some of the owls that have delighted you or plan your own owling adventure. To misquote Bugs Bunny, that's owl, folks. Thank you.